So Marcus, right. Our famously chaotic friend, the guy whose plans literally always shatter upon contact with reality, he actually tried to plan ahead this week.
He did. He really did. He made this highly coveted, like deeply romantic Valentine's Day dinner reservation 2 solid weeks in advance.
Which is huge for him.
Massive.
Mm-hmm.
Except he made it for February 15th.
I mean, you genuinely cannot make this stuff up. You just can't.
It's so on brand, it hurts.
It really does.
Okay.
Anyway, welcome to Just Johnny and Sophie, real conversations, real English every day.
Yeah, and today's story is, well, it's the perfect entry point.
Oh, totally. Because it perfectly illustrates this whole stack of research we're looking at regarding, like, the psychology of planning, the science of expectations, and how our brains actually process logistical failures.
Right. And I feel like we all know someone like Marcus, you know?
Oh, for sure. Think about it. Do you have a Marcus in your life? Someone who genuinely wants things to go smoothly, but they just operate as this walking magnet for chaos.
They can't help it. So today's mission really is to explore the anatomy of these mishaps.
Right.
We're going to dig into why trying, like really trying and failing, feels so much worse than not trying at all.
The worst.
Yeah, and the cognitive mechanics of adaptability. This is my favorite part. Why sometimes a spectacular failure actually triggers a better neurochemical reward than a flawless success.
Okay, so to really understand the psychology here, we have to look closely at the setup.
Right. The context is everything.
Exactly. So 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, Marcus announces to our group chat that he has, quote, secured a table at the most exclusive tasting menu spot in the city.
I remember reading that text and just staring at my phone.
Right. We were all genuinely thrilled for him because it was completely, entirely out of character.
Which is, the crucial element of this whole scenario, the effort.
Yes, the effort.
The behavioral research we're reviewing highlights this concept called the effort paradox. Usually, Marcus figures out his dinner plans at, 8 o'clock at night while standing in front of an open refrigerator.
Or eating cereal over the sink.
Exactly. So by putting in this massive, totally uncharacteristic organizational effort, he drastically altered his brain's expectation map.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, when you invest high effort into a task, your prefrontal cortex naturally anticipates a correspondingly high reward.
Right. Which is exactly what makes his arrival at the restaurant on February 14th so incredibly agonizing to picture.
It hurts to even think about.
It really does. I can just see it. Like, he walks past this massive crowd of people hovering near the door, all desperately hoping for a cancellation.
But he's got that walk, right?
Yes. He has this rare swagger of a man who knows he has finally beaten the system.
Oh, the confidence.
He walks right up to the host stand and just confidently gives his name.
And you know exactly what happens next.
Oh, it's so bad.
The restaurant host looks down at the iPad. They scroll. They scroll again.
The scrolling of doom.
Yes. The pause just stretches out forever.
Yeah.
And then they deliver the devastating news.
Sir, we have no reservation under your name.
Couch.
I have been thinking about, the specific sinking dread of that exact moment. It is universally terrible.
It's a very specific flavor of panic.
It's exactly like that classic anxiety dream, right? Where you show up for a university final exam, but in this version, you actually studied.
Oh, right.
Like, you skipped the party, you outlined the entire textbook, you color-coded your little notes.
You're so ready.
You stride into the lecture hall completely ready to crush it, only to realize you were 24 hours late and the exam was actually yesterday.
That is a remarkably accurate comparison. You're basically describing the acute collapse of a constructed reality.
But imagine adding romantic stakes to that sinking feeling. You're not just failing some professor. You're standing outside a completely packed restaurant on the absolute most high-pressure date night of the entire year with a partner who thought you had handled everything perfectly.
And the tragedy, the true agonizing comedy of this is that this was the one time he genuinely tried to be organized.
The one time.
Right. If Marcus had just, forgotten to make a reservation entirely, it would be an eye-roll moment. It would be baseline behavior.
We'd all just be like, oh, classic Marcus.
Exactly. But the psychology papers note that the failure of a sincere effort triggers a much sharper spike in social stress.
Oh, totally.
He put in the work, he meant well. And a failed sincere effort is always funnier to outsiders, sure, but it's also profoundly more sympathetic.
It really is. And, the physical manifestation of his mistake is literally all around him at that moment.
Right. Couples everywhere.
There is not a single empty chair in this place, let alone a table for two. So he steps out of the way, pulls out his phone, opens his confirmation email,
And
and
you guess.
there it is, glowing in the dark, February 15th.
See, most people would trigger a massive fight-or-flight response right there.
Oh, 100%.
They'd crumble, maybe start an argument with their partner just to deflect the shame, or just go home in silent, simmering resentment.
The silent car ride home. The worst.
But this is where Marcus's story takes a sharp turn into cognitive resilience.
Yes. So he steps out onto the sidewalk, and the very first thing he does is call me.
Naturally.
He just says, I'm standing outside, and explains the whole February 15th situation. And I have to confess to you, I laughed.
I mean, how could you not?
I tried. I really tried to be a supportive sounding board, but the irony was just too rich. But here's the thing. He didn't give up.
Right.
He hung up the phone, looked around, and found this tiny, totally unassuming pasta place just 2 streets over.
And this is where the behavioral science gets incredibly interesting. Because let's look at the stark contrast of that new environment.
It's night and day.
They walk in, and there is no special, overpriced Valentine's Day tasting menu.
No forced romantic decorations.
Right. There's no line out the door,
Yeah.
and no waiters breathing down your neck trying to rush you out so they can flip the table for the next couple in, like, 90 minutes.
Yeah.
The ambient stress drops to absolute zero.
Exactly. And the result. He sat there for 2 solid hours and had what he claimed was the absolute best pasta he has eaten in years.
Oh, wow.
Later that night, he sends a text to our group chat that just says, and I quote, honestly, the better option.
See, he was so convinced of this that he actually went back to the original fancy restaurant on the 15th, his actual reservation day, just to test the theory.
Oh my gosh, yes, he did.
And he reported the food wasn't nearly as good as that random pasta place.
Okay, now I have to push back a little here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because I've been looking at the research on the physiology of stress, right?
Oh.
Was the pasta actually that transcendent, or are we just looking at the mechanics of allostatic load?
I see where you're going.
Right. When you solve a massive immediate crisis, your body experiences this huge drop in cortisol and a massive spike in dopamine.
The relief high.
Yes. I'd argue that exact same bowl of pasta wouldn't have tasted remotely as magical if it hadn't been seasoned by the sheer adrenaline drop of narrowly avoiding a completely ruined night.
I see the physiological argument, I do, and the adrenaline drop is definitely a factor, but I'd argue it's driven more by cognitive framing than purely the endocrine response.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, if we look at the science of expectations, the literature highlights something called the contrast effect.
The contrast effect.
Yeah. When you go to a highly hyped exclusive restaurant on Valentine's Day, your expectations are astronomical.
Oh, for sure. You want a life-changing meal.
Exactly. The baseline is perfection. The food has to be mind-blowing just to meet the status quo.
So it's not just relief, it's the sudden removal of performative pressure. Like,
Yeah.
the fancy restaurant requires you to act romantic, while the quiet pasta place lets you actually be romantic.
Precisely. That's exactly it. The fancy restaurant is a performance.
Yeah.
When you stumble into a quiet spot because you've completely ruined your original plans, your expectation is basically just survival.
You're just happy to be eating indoors.
Right. So anything good, a warm plate of pasta, a decent glass of wine, feels like an absolute miracle. The contrast between expected disaster and adequate reality creates a massive subjective reward.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, and Marcus's ultimate conclusion was brilliant. He basically said, sometimes the mistake is the plan.
Sometimes the mistake is the plan. It's profound, honestly.
It really is.
But let's look at how our friend group reacted to his text, because the responses map perfectly onto the cognitive frameworks we're studying today.
Oh, the group chat was a goldmine.
Nothing reveals your psychological profile quite like how you process someone else's logistical chaos.
It erupted. It's a brilliant case study in contrasting psychological traits processing the exact same information.
Let's start with Lily.
Oh, Lily.
Lily is our hyper-organized, completely spreadsheet-dependent friend. When Marcus texted, honestly, the better option, Lily responded with a single word. She just wrote, Marcus, period.
A full stop.
Just Marcus.
See, Lily exhibits what psychologists call a high need for cognitive closure.
Okay.
She craves firm answers, predictable outcomes, rigid structure. For someone with that profile, Marcus's text isn't a victory at all.
No, it's a nightmare.
It's a terrifying reminder that her systems are vulnerable. That single word carried a deep existential exhaustion with his entire way of living.
She simply cannot compute the idea of an accidental win.
Not at all.
Then there's Dan.
Dan.
Dan is the calmest person on earth. He uses minimal words and literally never wastes energy. His response to the entire saga was just the word good,
Wow.
lowercase g.
Dan represents emotional regulation through detachment. He is the true stoic of the group.
Totally.
He doesn't invest cognitive energy in the what-ifs or the should-haves. The crisis was averted, calories were acquired, life continues.
Calories acquired. I love that. And then, of course, we have Maya.
Amaya.
Maya, who lives for maximum emotional impact. Her response came through in all caps, practically vibrating off the screen. This is the most romantic story I have ever heard.
She loved it. Maya engages in instant cognitive reframing. She completely bypassed the logistical failure and immediately framed it as a cinematic adventure.
She made it a rom-com in her head.
Exactly. And for the record, I can confirm the original restaurant really was just fine because I was the one who went with Marcus on the 15th to use the actual reservation.
Oh, that's right. I forgot you were his stand-in date.
I was. And the food was, technically proficient. The presentation was nice, but it completely lacked the soul of a rescued evening.
Which brings us to a really fascinating cognitive trait. The thing about Marcus is things genuinely always work out for him.
Because he lets them.
He lets them.
Yeah. We're looking at a concept called cognitive flexibility. It's the brain's ability to adapt its behavior and thinking in response to a rapidly changing, totally unpredictable environment.
Right.
We spend so much of our lives trying to rigidly control our surroundings, desperately trying to force reality to match the itinerary we built in our heads.
But Marcus doesn't fight the chaos. When the plan shatters, he doesn't spend an hour trying to glue the pieces back together while complaining about the sharp edges,
No, he just drops the pieces on the sidewalk and walks 2 streets over to eat pasta.
Exactly. He possesses a profound level of adaptability that most highly structured people desperately lack.
It's a mechanism for survival that ends up looking like luck.
It really does. And Marcus's ability to reframe the evening isn't just a fun personality quirk. It's actually reflected in the language we use to survive these exact moments.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's dig into the sociolinguistics of this for our Did You Catch That segment where we extract the real everyday English phrases hidden inside these stories so you can understand the mechanics behind them?
Yeah, we pulled 3 key expressions from the conversation today, all centered around the language of mishaps and recovery.
It's so fascinating how English uses specific idioms to act as like cultural buffers during high-stress situations.
It really is. The first one is to mean well.
I love the pragmatics of this phrase. We used this when we were talking about Marcus making that reservation 2 weeks early. We said, he meant well.
Right. To mean well is to have good intentions, to genuinely try to do something positive even when the execution goes completely wrong.
Yeah.
But linguistically, it's almost always used defensively to diffuse tension and protect the social standing of the person who made the mistake.
It's basically a phrase of grace.
Exactly.
Native speakers use this all the time to soften criticism in high-stakes environments. Like, you wouldn't walk into a boardroom and bluntly state, the marketing team ruined the product launch.
Right. That's too aggressive.
You'd say, the marketing team meant well with the new strategy, but the execution alienated our core demographic.
Much better.
You are acknowledging the good heart or the good intent behind the bad result. It keeps the peace.
Totally. The second phrase is the action you take when things go wrong to make the best of it.
Yes. When Marcus couldn't get into the fancy restaurant, he didn't throw a tantrum on the sidewalk. He found the pasta place. He made the best of it.
This phrase is fundamentally about resilience. It means finding the positive utility in a bad situation.
Right. You aren't pretending the problem doesn't exist.
No. You are actively choosing not to let the problem paralyze you. You are extracting whatever good you can from a difficult scenario.
And that leads perfectly into our third phrase, which is the ultimate payoff, it worked out.
When Marcus ended up having the best dinner he's had in months, despite the messy process, we say it worked out. It describes a situation that ends positively despite going sideways along the way.
Okay, let me put these all together in a realistic, high-stakes scenario so you can hear how they flow naturally in conversation.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you are managing a major corporate retreat. Your junior coordinator books the flights, and she means well, but she accidentally routes the entire executive team through a city with a massive, unexpected snowstorm.
Oh, no.
Everyone is grounded at the airport for 12 hours.
A logistical nightmare that would make most managers just panic.
Exactly. But instead of panicking or berating the coordinator, you book a private conference room in the airport lounge, order some decent catering, and turn the delay into an impromptu, highly productive brainstorming session. Make the best of it.
That's a great pivot. And as a result of that unbroken focus, the team actually finalizes the yearly budget 3 days ahead of schedule.
Yes, so despite the massive travel failure, it worked out.
See? Seamless. She meant well, you made the best of it, and ultimately it worked out.
Yeah, so those are your phrases. Which brings us to our challenge for you this week.
Yes, we want you to actively look for a moment to use the phrase, "it worked out."
Just try to naturally slip it into a sentence.
Exactly. Think of a time in your own life when a logistical failure turned into something unexpectedly brilliant. A missed train that resulted in a great conversation, or a wrong turn that led to a beautiful view. We genuinely want to hear your Marcus moment.
Yes, come share the story with us on Instagram at JustJohnnyandSophie, or drop it in the comments below on YouTube. We read every single one.
We really do. And a quick request before we wrap up today's story. If Marcus's chaotic Valentine's Day resonated with you today, or if you have ever stood on a sidewalk staring at your phone in sheer disbelief at your own mistake, please hit subscribe.
Whether you are on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your favorite conversations, subscribing is just the single best way to help us keep telling these stories and diving into the science behind them.
Definitely.
And if you happen to have a Marcus in your own life, that wonderfully chaotic friend who always miraculously lands on their feet, send them today's conversation. They will know exactly why you sent it.
Oh, they'll know. And before we officially say goodbye, we have to give you a tiny glimpse into Wednesday's story, because the pendulum is swinging violently in the opposite direction.
I know, it is magnificent.
It's terrifying.
We are going from Marcus's utter lack of planning to Lily's absolute over-planning.
Yep.
Lily has been organizing a group trip for 8 months. 8 months.
It's so intense.
She has created a spreadsheet that currently boasts 14 different tabs. But here's the kicker. Tab number 7 is locked.
Locked.
Nobody knows what is in tab 7. She absolutely refuses to say. And frankly, we are all too terrified to ask twice.
The mystery of tab 7. We will be unpacking the psychology of extreme control entirely on Wednesday.
I can't wait. But I do want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today as you go about your week. We live in a world that constantly tells us to be more like Lily. We are told to optimize, to schedule, to build the 14-tab spreadsheets for our careers, our diets, our relationships. But if we completely insulate ourselves with perfect, unbreakable plans, are we actually robbing ourselves of the brilliant, unexpected magic of a Marcus mistake?
That is a great question to ponder.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Real conversations.
Real English.
Every day.